All right, let's talk about a war that, well, it didn't just change things. It blew up the old world and created the one we're living in right now. I'm talking, of course, about World War I. You could say it's the real start of the 20th century.
And before we get into the how or the why of it all, I want you to just look at this number, 10 million military deaths. And that doesn't even begin to count the millions of civilians who were caught in the middle. This wasn't just another war. It was a complete and utter catastrophe, something on a scale the world had never, ever seen before.
So, you gotta ask, right? What made this conflict so fundamentally different from all the wars that came before it? Well, the reason is kind of simple and also terrifying. It wasn't just armies fighting armies anymore. This was entire societies going to war.
Yeah, for the first time, we really saw what historians call total war. And that means exactly what it sounds like. Everything, and I mean everyone, became part of the war machine. Factories that used to make regular clothes, now they're pumping out uniforms. Car companies, forget sedans, they're building tanks. The entire industrial power of a nation was pointed at one single terrifying goal: victory, no matter the cost. This was warfare on an industrial scale, with brand new horrors like airplanes, chemical weapons, and armored tanks making their debut.
But an explosion this big, it doesn't just happen out of nowhere, right? Nope. For decades, Europe was basically a giant powder keg, just filled with tension, and all it needed was a single spark to set the whole thing off.
And what's so wild is how all these different pressures were connected. First, you've got imperialism. All the big empires are scrambling for colonies and resources. Then, that gets supercharged by this intense nationalism. Think of Russia's idea of pan-Slavism, wanting to unite all Slavic people, or Germany's own pan-Germanism. It was like, our people are the best. Naturally, all this rivalry leads to a massive arms race, right? Everyone's building up their militaries. And underneath all of that, you have these old rivalries that just won't die, like France being absolutely desperate to get back the Alsace-Lorraine region from Germany.
So, to try and keep a lid on all this, Europe split itself into two big, armed-to-the-teeth teams, all bound by treaties. On one side, you have the Triple Alliance, mainly Germany and Austria-Hungary. On the other, the Triple Entente, which was France, Great Britain, and Russia. The idea, which sounds kind of crazy in hindsight, was that this balance of power would keep everyone from fighting, but what it really did was create a gigantic tripwire. One wrong move, and everyone gets dragged in.
And then it happened, the summer of 1914. In a city called Sarajevo, a place most people couldn't even find on a map at the time, someone fired a gun. And that tripwire, it was finally snapped.
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? How on earth does a single assassination lead to millions of deaths? Well, the answer is all tangled up in that crazy, fragile system of alliances we were just talking about.
Just watch how fast these dominoes fall. It's unbelievable. Okay, so step one, a Serbian nationalist shoots the Archduke, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Step two, Austria-Hungary, furious, declares war on Serbia. But wait, Russia sees itself as Serbia's protector, its big brother, so it starts getting its massive army ready. And that, step four, forces Germany, Austria-Hungary's ally, to declare war on Russia. Boom, boom, boom. In just a matter of weeks, the whole continent got pulled into the abyss.
Everyone thought this would be a quick, glorious war over by Christmas. They could not have been more wrong. Instead, on the Western Front, the armies literally dug themselves into the ground, and the war became this miserable, brutal stalemate that would last for years. It became the hell of trench warfare.
For the soldiers on the ground, life became a living nightmare. Imagine living in a deep ditch filled with mud and filthy water, so bad that you could get trench foot, a horrible infection that could literally cost you your leg. The place was crawling with huge rats, and I mean huge, and lice were everywhere. And the sound? The constant sound of artillery explosions, it destroyed minds, a condition they called shell shock. Today, we'd call it PTSD. And then, out in front was that terrifying space between the trenches, no man's land, just a wasteland of mud and barbed wire where nobody could survive for long. So, let's break down the day-to-day reality. Hygiene, forget it. It didn't exist. Disease was just as likely to kill you as a bullet. Food, awful, cold, and there was never enough. And the strategy? My gosh, the strategy was just tragic. Generals would order waves of men over the top, charging straight into machine gun fire. All for what? A few yards of mud. It was industrialized slaughter, plain and simple.
And to try and break this awful deadlock, both sides got creative. in the most horrible way imaginable. They unleashed new and terrible weapons, things like poison gas that would burn your lungs out, flamethrowers to clear out trenches, and eventually the first tanks, these giant metal monsters built to roll right over no man's land. The whole business of war had become more mechanically monstrous than ever.
So, after 4 unbelievably long years of this carnage, the war finally came to an end in 1918. But the world that was left? It was completely changed, almost unrecognizable from the one that went into it. The piece of paper that officially ended it all was the Treaty of Versailles. Now, it was supposed to have one job: create a peace that would last forever. But, well, it didn't. In fact, you could say it planted the seeds for an even worse war just down the road. And the fallout from this treaty was massive and immediate. First off, it pointed the finger squarely at Germany, saying, "This was all your fault." And it forced them to pay these insane amounts of money, reparations, that totally wrecked their economy and made people incredibly angry. At the same time, the United States, which got in late, came out as the new global economic superpower. The whole center of gravity for the world shifted. Oh, and they created this new thing called the League of Nations, which was supposed to stop future wars. A nice idea, but its foundations were shaky from the start.
But maybe the biggest outcome, even bigger than the treaty, was this. The war didn't just beat countries. It completely wiped entire empires off the map. Gone. The German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, these huge powers that had dominated the world for centuries just vanished. And in their place, a whole bunch of new countries popped up, completely redrawing the map of Europe and the Middle East, which, as you can imagine, set the stage for a whole century of new conflicts.
Which leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? They called it the war to end all wars. The idea was that it was so awful, so devastating, that nobody in their right mind would ever do it again. But then you look at what happened. By punishing Germany so severely, and by creating this brand new, unstable map of the world, did the Peace Treaty of 1919 accidentally make the War of 1939 pretty much inevitable? It's a heavy thought, and one that history is still wrestling with today.